Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This session will focus on Student Learning Objectives, or SLOs, specifically the Texas Student Learning Objectives Model. We'll be discussing the Texas SLO model, which is an approved student growth measure for the Teacher Incentive Allotment Program. Our agenda includes an overview of today's objectives and a detailed look at our session's content. We have a lot to cover this session, and it's going to be a very productive hour. Our goals are to, number one, understand the basics, gain a solid understanding of the three phases of the SLO process. Number two, the body of evidence. We want to learn how the evidence works and why it is a key part of the SLO process. Number three, recognize quality skill statements. We want to identify and practice creating effective SLO skill statements. Number four, we want to differentiate skill profiles. We want to explain the differences between an initial skill profile and a targeted skill profile. And number five, the inclusion of non-tested teachers. We want to explore how SLOs can be used to include teachers who are not part of a traditional testing system in your local designation system. Districts have the flexibility to decide which teachers will be a part of the teacher incentive allotment and which student growth measures to use. Many districts will use tests. SLOs provide a valid and reliable alternative for subjects that do not have easily applicable tests. This approach ensures that all teachers, including those of non-tested subjects, can be included in a meaningful way. Today, we're going to be focusing on the system development piece, specifically on student learning objectives, or SLOs. As mentioned, we are using the Texas SLO model. Texas SLO model is designed as an alternative to tests to allow for the measurement of student growth in content areas where student growth cannot be easily assessed through traditional means. Early in the Teacher Incentive Allotment Program, we discovered that many districts were using what they called SLOs, but they were actually pre-test, post-test systems. Questions like, how do I do the pre-test for my SLO arose frequently. However, in the Texas SLO model, a pre-test for an SLO is not a test. It's a body of evidence of student work. SLOs are designed as an alternative to tests, though districts can choose to use tests if they prefer. It's important to note that if you claim to be using SLOs, you must adhere to the Texas SLO process. Today, we will delve into what it means to truly implement SLOs according to this model. Let's briefly compare SLOs and tests. SLOs are based on a body of student work collected throughout the school year, allowing you to see student progression. Multiple data points are used to measure student growth. The pre-test post-test typically covers a broader scope of material and measures growth based on performance on two tests, one at the beginning and one at the end of the year. Both methods can be valid and reliable and are acceptable for the teacher incentive allotment. Depending on the teacher and subject, you might choose SLOs, pre-test, post-test, or even a portfolio approach, which we will discuss later. The goal is to include as many teachers as possible with valid and reliable growth measures. The benefits of using SLOs are numerous. Number one, versatility. SLOs can be applied to any content area, including core subjects, non-core subjects, fine arts, early childhood education, and career and technical education. This versatility is a significant advantage. It's also teacher-driven. The SLO process is driven by teachers. Many teachers are already considering what assessments to use for various content areas and analyzing student work to gauge understanding and mastery. This process formalizes what many teachers are already doing informally. There's the individualized growth targets as well. Each student has a personalized growth target based on their current learning level. This individualized approach is beneficial compared to an overall average. And then last but not least, it is an evidence-based alternative to testing. SLOs provide an alternative to relying solely on standardized tests. Teachers can demonstrate student growth through a body of evidence, such as student work from different points in the school year. This method can be more reflective of student progress than a single test. These are just a few key benefits of implementing the SLO process. The enabling conditions for student learning objectives include strong campus-level administrator capacity. Campus-level administrators are highly involved in the process. Going hand in hand with these strong campus-level administrators are going to be strong teachers. So we need strong teacher capacity and involvement. Teachers really formulate this process every step of the way. So having their capacity is going to be vital. SLOs also have another enabling condition, and that's going to be funding, because there is a required training to implement the Texas SLO model. Reach out to your ESE partners for training opportunities. Next, we will explore the 3 phases of the Texas SLO process. At a high level, the SLO process consists of 3 phases. Phase 1, or design. This phase involves setting up your SLO system, including developing skill statements and initial skill profiles. It focuses on establishing growth targets based on early year evidence of students' current performance and expected end-of-year outcomes. This requires strong administrator and teacher capacity. Phase 2, monitoring. This phase is about ongoing assessment and evidence collection. It includes assignments, tasks, and projects that assess the foundational skills outlined in your skill statements. Continuous monitoring and evidence gathering are key components of this phase. This also requires strong administrator and teacher capacity. Phase 3, evaluation. At the end of the year, the phase evaluates students' final skills based on the collected evidence. It determines whether students have met their growth targets. These are 3 distinct phases, and they ensure a comprehensive and structured approach to the SLO process. Let's dive into the details of Phase 1. Phase 1 of the SLO process involves 4 key components. Number 1, writing the SLO skill statement. This statement should be based on a foundational skill of the course. For example, in 3rd grade math, the primary focus is on multiplication. While other topics like ratios, pie charts, and bar graphs are covered, multiplication is the core skill. Therefore, an SLO skill statement for 3rd grade math would center around multiplication. Number 2, creating the initial skill profile. This is where teachers assess where each student stands at the beginning of the year concerning the skill statement. So for instance, in 3rd grade math, teachers determine that students' proficiency in multiplication. Some students might be able to add and subtract 4-digit numbers, while others still might struggle with 2-digit numbers or regrouping. And then in 3, we're setting those growth targets. Based on the initial skill profile and planned instruction, teachers set growth targets for the end of the year. These targets describe the expected skill level each student should achieve, not a test score, but in terms of their ability to perform the skill. We're going to establish expected growth targets, and teachers are going to define what growth looks like for each student based on their initial skill level and instruction they receive throughout the year. Let's look at some examples of successful SLO skill statements. A strong skill statement includes 4 critical elements. It's foundational to the course, it's persistent through the course, it's measurable, and leads to goals. For it to be foundational to the course, the skill should be a core component of the course. So for example, we use 3rd grade math and multiplication as foundational. Another example could be 4th grade reading and language arts. The focus might be on writing narratives, including sentence transition and paragraph structure, rather than a smaller unit that they cover like limericks. Number 2, it has to be persistent throughout the course. So the skill should be relevant throughout the entire course. For example, multiplication is a reoccurring theme in 3rd grade math, and writing skills are consistently developed in 4th grade reading and language arts. They need to be measurable. The skill must be quantifiable. Teachers need to be able to assess and measure the student's proficiency in the skill. And we are also looking for growth. Does it lead to growth? The skill should contribute to the student's growth within the course and beyond. Foundational skills like multiplication or writing will have a long-lasting value and applicability. To summarize, a strong SLO skill statement is foundational to the course, persists throughout the course, is measurable, and leads to growth. These elements ensure that the skill statement is robust and effective in guiding student learning and assessment. Let's examine an example of a strong skill statement. On the left, you'll see 4 key elements. It's foundational to the course, it persists throughout the course, measurable, and leading to growth within and beyond the course. So in this example, students will use conventions of shading to convey perspective in a pencil pen sketch. In drawing 1, a foundational skill is understanding how to use light and dark shading to create perspective. This skill is central to the course, making it a strong skill statement. A non-example would be simply stating drawing or focusing on a 2-week art history lesson. That doesn't really capture what the course is about, and it's not foundational to the course. While art history, it's valuable, it's not the core focus of drawing one, which is more about practical skills like shading and perspective. Let's look at another example. Write clear and well-documented lab reports that analyze and synthesize experimental results using the language of science. This skill statement is specific and detailed, outlining exactly what the students are expected to do. A non-example would be simply stating lab report. It lacks the specificity needed. The skill statement should clearly define the expected outcomes and actions, using precise verbs to describe the tasks. When evaluating skill statements, administrators and appraisers will look for alignment with these success criteria to ensure they capture the essence of a foundational skill. Here's one more example for a culinary arts course. Students will be able to plan and prepare a nutritionally sound meal, applying industry standard cooking techniques using American Culinary Federation education standards for sanitation and safety. The non-example would be students will use proper cooking conditions to follow recipes and prepare nutritionally sound meals. This statement lacks the specificity and standards mentioned in the example. A strong skill statement includes knowledge of industry standards, application, and measurable progress. It should specify not just the action of cooking, but also the standards and safety measures involved, ensuring a comprehensive and detailed approach. Next, we will focus on the initial skill profile, which is in part 2 of phase 2. This involves determining where your students stand concerning the foundational skill or skill statement we previously defined. Whether it's culinary arts or 8th grade science or 3rd grade math, you will need to assess your students' current abilities related to that skill. To do this, you will need a skill progression rubric. The rubric outlines what students typically can do at the beginning of the year. It categorizes students into different skill levels: advanced, average, and below average. The initial skill profile describes each specific skill level. It's similar to a skill progression rubric, but focuses on detailing the specific skills students possess at the start of the year. This profile helps you understand where students are before you begin teaching them. Just as we have success criteria for the skill statement, we also have success criteria for the initial skill profile. The ISP must align with the skill statement. It should directly relate to the skill statement you created. It should articulate a beginning of the year skill, clearly describe the specific and measurable skills students have at the start of the year. It should also differentiate skill levels, so distinguish between the various levels of student skills, and it should be evidence-based. We want to use concrete evidence to support skill levels described. You can download an exemplar ISP for 8th grade English Language Arts using the provided link. Review this initial skill profile and compare it to the success criteria to ensure it accurately describes student skills at the beginning of the year. Using the example of the ISP, notice the initial skill profile helps determine where students stand at the beginning of the year concerning the foundational skill. For example, in 8th grade, the skill statement might be students will be able to draw accurately and accurate conclusions supported by appropriate textual evidence from informational text. At the start of the year, 8th graders typically can comprehend and summarize informational text, but may struggle with making inferences. The initial skill profile should describe the varying levels of proficiency, including 5 different skill levels, to provide a clear picture of where the students are starting. The initial skill profile should describe varying levels of proficiency, including 5 different skill levels. To provide a clear picture of where students are starting, in an 8th grade English class, students' initial skill profiles might look like this. At typical, the students can comprehend and summarize informational text, but are not yet making inferences. Maybe at above typical, students can start making inferences, but may not have strong textual evidence to support them. At well above typical, students can make inferences and provide some textual evidence, and then well below typical students, they really struggle to comprehend informational text, often due to a previous focus on fiction. Now, these descriptors help differentiate skill levels and provide students the evidence and abilities needed at the beginning of the year. Next, you will align your students to these skill levels. For example, a teacher might have students like Maria, Kendrick, Felipe, Diana, Asima and Natasha. Over the first 6 weeks, the teacher assigns various tasks, such as multiple choice questions, short answers, prompt responses, free writes, and analysis essays, all scored on a scale of 1 to 4. Based on these assignments, the teacher assesses each student's proficiency. For instance, Maria might perform well across all tasks, indicating that she is well above typical for the entering 8th grader. Other students might show varying levels of proficiency, from typical to below typical, based on their performance on these initial assignments. The next step is to analyze all the information and assignments to determine each student's skill level based on the evidence. For example, Maria works most closely with the well above typical skill level, while Kendrick's work aligns with the typical skill level. The alignment is based on the descriptors in the initial skill profile we discussed earlier. Using strong descriptors and concrete evidence, you can actually match each student's work to the appropriate skill level. This process ensures that your assessments are evidence-based and reliable. This is a high-level overview, and there are more details involved, but the key idea is to use student work to determine which descriptors in the ISP they most closely align with. At the end of the year, you will repeat this process to determine where students have progressed. You will write descriptors for end-of-year skills known as the targeted skill profile. The profile should look very different from the ISP, reflecting the growth and learning that has occurred over the year. What is a targeted skill profile? The TSP, or targeted skill profile, will describe what advanced, typical, and below typical students can do at the end of the year. For example, advanced students might be able to perform complex tasks with ease, while below typical students might still be working on foundational skills. The targeted skill profile, or TSP, provides a clear picture of student progress after a full year of instruction. I'll provide a couple of examples to illustrate this process. Let's discuss the success criteria for a strong targeted skill profile. A robust TSP should articulate end-of-year skills, clearly describing the skills students should have by the end of the year. It should also differentiate skill levels, show a clear progression of skills across different levels, similar to the ISP. It should be specific and evidence-based, using multiple sources of evidence to support the skill levels. And lastly, you should be able to set reasonable expectations and establish ambitious yet attainable goals for students. You can download an exemplar TSP for 8th grade English Language Arts using the provided link. Compare the ISP to see how the typical skill levels differ. The TSP should reflect significant growth from the ISP. Notice on the targeted skill profile the descriptors for student skill levels across the 5 different levels at the end of the year. Let's review the success criteria for evidence in the targeted skill profile. Remember, it's going to describe the end of the year skills. It's going to include differentiated skill levels. It's going to be aligned to the skill statement. It's going to allow for multiple assessments or multiple types of pieces of evidence to be used to measure that student proficiency. It is going to be based on the teacher's knowledge. So it's going to reflect the teacher's understanding of what students can achieve by the end of the year. It's also going to show significant growth. It's going to demonstrate substantial progress when compared to the ISP descriptors. In the example, all the descriptors begin with students can draw accurate conclusions, showing a progression from well below typical to well above typical, with specific wording that illustrates the changes in skill levels. When comparing the targeted skill profile to the initial skill profile, you should notice significant differences. Even though both use terms like typical, above typical, well above typical, these terms describe student skills levels before and after instruction, respectively. The TSP should reflect substantial growth from the ISP. A strong TSP clearly describes end-of-year skills for an 8th grade class. That includes the 5 distinct skill levels, and it aligns to the skill statement and accommodates various types of assignments and assessments that could be used. They include readings, writings, prompts, full essays, all based on what the student can achieve by the end of the year. For new teachers who may not know what a typical is for that eighth grader at the end of the year, collaboration is key. If your district has multiple eighth grade English teachers, consult with your colleagues to understand what typical skill levels are at the beginning and end of the year. In a smaller district or schools, you might want to talk with your seventh and ninth grade teachers to get a sense of student progression. For example, at the beginning of the year, a student might be able to analyze grade level text. By the end of the year, they should be able to analyze above grade level text and support their conclusions with evidence. This progression shows significant growth, even if the descriptors still use terms like typical. Finally, the last phase involves setting expected growth targets. Based on evidence gathering, determine where you expect your students to be at the end of the year. This involves understanding what typical looks like at the beginning of the year and setting realistically yet ambitious targets for your students. Understanding what typical skill levels look like at the end of the year after a full year of instruction is crucial. Based on the data collected, you will need to set growth targets for each student. This involves making informed decisions using student work from the first 6 to 8 weeks of the year to establish a targeted skill level for each student by the end of the year. For example, in Ms. Carnation's 8th grade English class, she uses various assessments to gather evidence, including 3 free write essays, 2 analysis essays, a reading fluency test on informational text, and prompt responses. Based on this evidence, she aligns each student's work to the skill descriptors. Below typical, we see Asima and Diana. Typical is Natasha. Above typical is going to be Kendrick. And then well above typical, we see Maria and Ethel. This alignment is based on the data and evidence collected throughout the year. To summarize, the initial skill profile. It's a rubric that defines beginning of the year skill levels based on current and historical data, describing what students can do when they first enter the classroom. The targeted skill profile is also a rubric that defines end of year skill levels, describing what students can achieve after a full year of instruction. The TSP should show significant growth compared to the ISP. And this concludes phase 1 of the SLO process. In phase 1, we focused on creating skill statements, the initial skill profile, the targeted skill profile, and setting expected growth targets for where we expect students to be by the end of the year. Now let's move on to phase 2, monitor progress. Phase 2 is all about monitoring progress and building a body of evidence. This spans the bulk of the school year and involves assigning various tasks and projects. For example, in a welding class, a student might progress from basic welding techniques to more advanced methods like the TIG weld. In a culinary arts class, students move from learning standards to applying them in the kitchen with the focus on safety and sanitation. During this phase, you will collect evidence of student progress. This involves defining what will be included in the body of evidence and ensuring there are at least 5 pieces of student work. While some districts may use pre-test and post-test, SLOs are based on comprehensive body of evidence. Tests can be included, but they should be a part of a broader collection of student work. Additionally, there is a mid-year check-in where appraisers review the body of evidence with teachers. This check-in helps determine if the expected growth targets are still accurate, if adjustments are needed, and how the data is shaping up. All these components are crucial parts of phase 2. Let's look at an example of building a body of evidence. Suppose your skill statement is, students will be able to draw accurate conclusions supported by appropriate textual evidence from informational text. Which assignments should be included in the body of evidence? Ensure that your body of evidence aligns with the skill statement. Some assignments, while part of the 8th grade curriculum, may not align with this specific skill statement. Review the slide and skill statement to determine which assignments match and can be used as a part of the body of evidence. Assignments related to claims of evidence, such as informational text writing, evidence essays, and free response essays should be included. These tasks align with the skill statement's focus on making claims, drawing conclusions, and making accurate inferences based on informational text. Assignments like haikus and autobiographies, although valuable, do not align with the skill statement and should not be included in the body of evidence for this particular SLO. The same applies to the poetry journals. While they are part of the curriculum, they do not support the skill statement focused on informational text and evidence-based conclusions. Now let's move on to phase 3. This involves evaluating the process at the end of the year. By this point, you will have collected a substantial body of evidence. At the end of the year, you will have various pieces of evidence, such as written essays, free response essays, prompt responses, and analysis essays from your 8th graders. The next step is to evaluate this body of evidence to determine each student's skill level on the targeted skill profile. This evaluation helps you understand where each student stands in relation to the skill statement and their growth over the year. Use the body of evidence, or BOE, to determine each student's end of year, or EOY, skill level. Align each student's work with the appropriate skill level on the targeted skill profile, or TSP. During the end of the year teacher appraisal conference, the appraiser reviews the body of evidence, or BOE, and approves the assigned skill levels. When reviewing the work, compare it to the TSP descriptors to determine which one most closely matches each student's performance. The final step of phase 3 ensures that evaluations are evidence-based and accurate. Both appraisers and teachers need to be trained in this process to ensure consistency and reliability. Typically, appraisers receive training at the ESC, or Educational Service Center, when they train their teachers. Alternatively, the ESC may provide on-site training for both appraisers and teachers. Appraisers will check for a minimum of 5 pieces of student work in the body of evidence, and they may cross-check a sample from students to verify the accuracy of the assigned skill levels. Did my students meet expected growth? In this phase, you're going to compare the targeted growth goals set at the beginning of the year with their actual EOY skill levels. Review the targeted growth goal for each student and compare it to their actual skill level on the end of the year skill rubric to determine if they met their goals. While this example only includes 6 students, most teachers will have more. For simplicity, let's consider that 4 out of 6 students met or exceeded their expected growth targets, equating to approximately 66% of Miss Carnation students. It's crucial to emphasize that all of this is based on evidence when implementing the SLOs. With detailed curriculum-based descriptors, the progress and process can be valid and reliable as any other growth measure. However, setting these targets requires integrity. Ensure that your descriptors are accurate from the start and that your evaluations are evidence-based. A neutral observer should be able to reach the same conclusions based on the evidence provided. This approach ensures that SLOs are valid and reliable growth measure, particularly useful in non-tested courses. In summary, 66% of the students showed growth on their SLOs. The district would consider this student growth, along with other factors such as teacher observation, to determine if this teacher should be put forth for a designation. To recap the benefits of SLOs, they're versatile. They're applicable to any content area. They're teacher-driven, based on the teacher's knowledge of their students and their work. They're individualized. Each student has a personalized growth target based on their actual work, and they serve as an alternative to testing, providing a valid option for areas where traditional tests may not be the best fit. These benefits make SLOs a valuable tool for measuring student growth and supporting teacher development. To implement SLOs effectively, training is required. Districts interested in using SLOs next school year will need to sign up for training. Please contact your local ESC or Education Service Center to find out the next SLO training session is scheduled. And attending this training will provide a deeper understanding of SLOs and how they can be integrated into your local designation system. We are proud to announce that ESC1 is serving as the Texas SLO and Portfolio Hub, available to all Texas districts and ESCs to support with planning, implementation, training, and support. For services, please contact ESC1 at tia@esc1.net. Thank you for joining us, and please visit tiatexas.org for more resources.